Over on Jaguar 7, a new baseball video is out. In this video, we talk about a bizarre broadcasting decision that ESPN made during the 1991 season, and how it might just be the worst broadcasting decision they ever made when it came to baseball. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. The Ricky Williams trade. In all likelihood, you know the story. It's one of the most famous stories in the history of the NFL draft, where the New Orleans Saints, in an effort to acquire Ricky Williams, decided to trade up with Washington by giving up, quite literally, their entire draft. The Saints had just one pick in that draft class, which was Ricky Williams, as they gave up their first, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh round picks in 1999, along with a first and third round pick in 2000. Giving up the farm to move up from pick number 12 to pick number 5. And I can't quite say it was a good move for New Orleans, seeing as he only played 3 seasons with the Saints. And while by no means was he a bad player, he certainly wasn't worth that. Then again, very few players are. And he would only really find his footing once he joined the Miami Dolphins in 2002. Having said that, the Ricky Williams trade remains iconic more than 2 decades later because of the sheer absurdity of it, and the idea of trading away your entire draft class for one person. You're trading a bunch of lottery tickets for one, and you're banking on this one player being so good and such a surefire thing that he will improve your roster more than having a bunch of picks ever would. And while you probably know about the Ricky Williams trade, as there are tons of videos and articles about it, and it's very well documented, you might not know that this was not the first time that a team tried to do this. Because 1 year before, in 1998, the Green Bay Packers attempted to do the same exact thing, and trade their entire draft class for one player. This is the story behind the much less publicized predecessor to the Ricky Williams trade, and one of the craziest trade proposals in the history of the NFL draft. Before I talk about the trade in question, and why the Packers wanted to acquire the man that you're going to be watching this whole time, we need some context to understand what exactly the Packers were looking for heading into the draft, because there was one absolutely glaring need that they had in mind. Obviously, Green Bay was a great team that was set at most positions. When you make the Super Bowl the previous season and 2 years ago, you're coming off of a Super Bowl victory with the #1 offense and #1 defense in all of football. When you've gone 31-7 over your last 38 games, including the playoffs, winning 82% of the time, when you've got the 3-time reigning MVP on your team, and when you made it to at least the divisional round in each of the last 5 years and the NFC Championship in each of the last 3, clearly, you're doing something right. But if there was one thing that the Packers absolutely had to address going into the 1998 season, if they wanted to make it to their 3rd Super Bowl in a row, without a doubt, it was their pass rush. It wasn't very good in 1997, as their 41 sacks ranked in the bottom half of the league. It was perhaps the main reason why they lost the Super Bowl to the Denver Broncos, as John Elway, despite attempting 22 passes for Denver, did not get sacked once. Any pressure whatsoever, and they might win that game. Instead, it's one of the biggest upsets in the history of the Super Bowl. As a side note, to learn more about that game, click the card in the upper right corner. And if their pass rush was already pretty lethargic, it was about to get a heck of a lot worse. For the 1997 season, the 2 starting defensive ends were Reggie White and Gabe Wilkins. They were 2 of the only 3 guys on the team to have more than 3 sacks. Wilkins was now in San Francisco, so he was no longer on the team. And look, Reggie White is amazing. He might be the greatest defensive end to ever play this sport. You can't deny that, and you can learn more about his career by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But he had back problems and was contemplating retirement. He was still on the fence heading into the draft about hanging it up, and he was going to be 37 years old, so he could fall off a cliff at any moment. You have to replace one defensive end no matter what, because Wilkins is gone, and you might have to replace 2 depending on what White decides to do. And at the very least, you gotta groom someone for the future, because White doesn't have much left in the tank. if anything at all. So it was incredibly apparent that the Packers had to improve their pass rush. No questions asked. And the man that you've been watching this whole time? This is Florida State defensive end Andre Wadsworth, and he was the solution to Green Bay's problems. He was never going to be the first overall pick, simply because he was not a quarterback. That was always going to be either Tennessee quarterback Peyton Manning or Washington State quarterback Ryan Leaf. But it seemed like you could pencil in Wadsworth to whatever team had the number 3 pick, as he was going to be the first non-quarterback off the board. During the 1997 season, Wadsworth played an absolutely critical part in helping Florida State go 11-1, win the ACC, win the Sugar Bowl, end as the number 3 ranked team in the nation, and finish with the 7th best defense in Division 1A, as he might have been the best defensive lineman in the nation. In 1997, Wadsworth had 16 sacks and 19 tackles for a loss, being named not just the ACC Defensive Player of the Year, but being named a consensus All-America selection, as well as the ACC Player of the Year, becoming the first defender in FSU history to win this award, and becoming the first defender since Michael Perry out of Clemson won this award more than a decade ago. For some perspective on how good Wadsworth was, in the last 35 years, the last 35 times to date that the award has been given out, 34 times it went to an offensive player. Andre Wadsworth is the exception. He won an offensive award. The same shock you get when a non-quarterback or running back wins the Heisman? Yeah, that's the shock you get when Wadsworth wins this award. He was that good and was that dominant. And everyone was super high on him. This wasn't just a man projected to be the best pass rusher in the class. This was a man projected to be one of the best pass rushers of all time. You couldn't find one person who had a single negative thing to say about him. As Indianapolis Colts president Bill Polian said, "I certainly think he has a chance to be Bruce Smith. He's the best pass rusher I've seen since Bruce Smith. He combines speed and strength. You can't say much about rookies, but the one thing you can say is that in any other year, he'd be the first player in the draft." Charlie Armey, the personnel director for the St. Louis Rams, echoed those thoughts and said that he was the next Bruce Smith. And another man who felt that way was Green Bay Packers general manager Ron Wolf, who said, "He's like a Bruce Smith or Reggie White. He's the best defensive lineman to come into the National Football League in the 1990s. Just to give you an idea of how high praise that comparison is, both Smith and White are in the Hall of Fame, and the two men combined for 398 sacks in their careers, finishing 1-2 among the top of the leaderboard in that category. And Andre Wadsworth was being compared to those men as a surefire thing, and as a man who could completely wreck the game and destroy opposing offensive lines. As one writer said, an NFL scout can poke holes in just about any potential draft pick, given enough time. But then, there was Florida State defensive end Andre Wadsworth, who might be a flawless prospect. From only being recruited by one school, which was then Division III school Stony Brook on Long Island, to having to walk on to FSU, and now to being compared to Bruce Smith and Reggie White, two of the greatest defensive ends of all time. There was just one small problem. Yeah, the Packers, because they won the NFC, had pick number 29 out of 30 teams. And Andre Wadsworth was supposed to go 3rd overall. Unless Wadsworth somehow murdered 5 guys from the start of the month until the NFL draft commenced, he wasn't slipping to 29. And even then, some teams still might have taken a flyer on him before he got to Green Bay. And the Packers really wanted him, especially since Wolf admitted that not only was defensive end the biggest need on the team, but that it was unlikely that they could fill it at pick number 29, meaning that they would have to trade up somehow. Said Wolf, "I'm not certain there's going to be any players there that would warrant selection at either one of those picks," which was a problem, seeing as you typically want to draft starters in the first round, and the only starting position that was needed going into 1998 was at defensive end, which was a premium position. If they were going to trade up and get Wadsworth, and get the next Reggie White or Bruce Smith, they were going to have to do it with the team that had the number 3 pick, the Arizona Cardinals. But the problem with the Cardinals? Their front office strove an insanely high bargain. The Cards weren't even going to take a quarterback with pick number 2, seeing as they just drafted Jake Plummer in the second round in 1997, and he finished 3rd in the voting for Offensive Rookie of the Year. And despite that, and despite only moving down 1 spot with the San Diego Chargers, they got a 2nd-round pick in 1998, a 1st-round pick in 1999, and 2 players. These were free picks and players. They essentially got free ammo for doing exactly what they were going to do anyways, but now, just a spot lower. They even rejected a trade where the New Orleans Saints would give up their entire draft to get whichever quarterback between Manning and Leaf was left over. So the Cardinals seemed dead set on taking Wadsworth, to the point where any team that wanted to get that number 3 pick would need to give up the farm. When the St. Louis Rams inquired about the pick, the Cardinals asked for starting right tackle Wayne Gandy, wide receiver Eddie Hennison, the team's 1st-round pick in 1998 and 1999, and their 2nd-round pick in 1998. One rumor said that the Jacksonville Jaguars were trying to trade up, and the Cardinals said that they needed Kevin Hardy, who was the number 2 pick in 1996, and 2 first-round picks to pull the trigger. Hilariously, when the Baltimore Ravens inquired about the pick when it was number 2, the Cardinals wanted a first-round pick along with linebacker Peter Boulware, as in the reigning Defensive Rookie of the Year, and left tackle Jonathan Ogden, who was already one of the best tackles in the game and would eventually make the Hall of Fame. Yeah, the Ravens just laughed in the Cardinals' face with that one. So Ron Wolf needed something special to do this. And that's when he did it. He offered the entire treasure chest, or at the very least, considered doing it. Wolf was so high on Wadsworth and his potential, and knew that he would come in right away and fill a position of need, that he said, straight up, that he was going to trade all 8 of his draft picks to move up to number 3 and get Wadsworth. That's pick number 29, pick number 60, pick number 90, pick number 121, pick 150, pick 152, pick 187, and pick 218 in exchange for 1 player. It's a 1st, a 2nd, a 3rd, a 4th, 2 5ths, a 6th, and a 7th. It's the entire treasure chest. And considering Wolf's public comments on it, and his insanely high praise of Wadsworth, it really looked like the Packers were going to do everything in their power, even if it meant pulling a Ricky Williams before the Ricky Williams trade was a thing, to do it. To the point where ESPN reported on it and dedicated a ton of coverage to it. However, there's a reason that you might not have ever heard about this, and that's because the trade never went through. The Cardinals drove a hard bargain, and if they rejected the offer of New Orleans' entire draft class when it was at pick number 2, even though the Saints were a worse team, and therefore the Cards would only be dropping down to pick number 7, they were not going to drop down all the way to pick number 29. Maybe if the Packers offered some future picks in there, but the Cards weren't going to pass up their chances at a blue-chip prospect like Andre Wadsworth. At least, not just with the entire draft that the Packers had. And if we go by the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, it makes sense, seeing as pick number 3 is valued at 2,200 points, and the Packers picks combined, all 8 of them, were only valued somewhere around 1,200. So despite a valiant effort by the Packers, it was all for nothing, as they were not going to be able to acquire that 3rd pick. Having said that, I don't think the Packers are complaining that the Cardinals deal they desperately wanted never went through, seeing as Wadsworth unfortunately did not pan out in the NFL at all. It was not his fault. His knees were absolutely shot, as he had 3 knee surgeries in his first 3 seasons, and was out of the NFL by the end of the 2000 season. He absolutely could have been a star if he just could have stayed healthy. There are certain guys with rotten injury luck, and Wadsworth, who only had 7 sacks in the pros as a result, was one of them. Now, it's not like the Packers did much of anything with that 1998 draft anyways. They eventually traded up to get defensive end Vonnie Holliday, who had 32 sacks with the Packers, and they got some production out of wide receiver Corey Bradford, but for the most part, everyone they drafted either flamed out, or in the case of quarterback Matt Hasselbeck, had their production come with another team. So even though the Packers technically won, since Holiday was better than Wadsworth, this was somewhat of a lose-lose, even if the Packers lost considerably less. But still, it's crazy to think that the Saints were not the only team to try and trade their entire draft class for one guy, and that Ron Wolf saw merit to the strategy. If you believe that strongly in a player at a premium position, to the point where you're comparing him to Bruce Smith and Reggie White, you do whatever it takes to get him, because there's no price too steep to pay for a player like that at a position like that. Because in 1998, let's say that when it came to pick number 3 to try and acquire Andre Wadsworth, in the eyes of Ron Wolf and the Green Bay Packers, it was worth a lot. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.